I stand in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel of my rusted delivery van. Through the windshield, I watch my wife of 25 years kiss a man 10 years younger, handing him a folder containing the deed to a house I paid for. She thinks I am just a pathetic, overworked courier who barely makes minimum wage. She thinks I am completely blind to her draining our life savings. But she doesn't know that every single package I've delivered over the last 6 months was a carefully placed brick in a wall that is about to crush her entirely. Tomorrow she gets her final delivery, and it will cost her absolutely everything. Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever had someone look down on you just because of the job you do to put food on the table? Tell me your story in the comments below. And let me know where in the world you are tuning in from today and what time it is there. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss out on these stories of justice. Now, let's get into it. Take that ridiculous uniform off before you sit on the white leather, Arthur. Eleanor didn't even look up from her iPad as I walked into the kitchen. The smell of her expensive espresso filled the air, a sharp contrast to the stale coffee I'd picked up at a gas station an hour ago. I stopped at the edge of the living room, looking down at my brown cargo pants and the logo of Peak Logistics stitched onto my shirt. "I'm just grabbing my thermos," I said, my voice deliberately flat. She sighed, a dramatic, breathy sound that she had perfected over the last 3 years. "Make it quick. My charity committee is coming over in an hour, and I don't want the house smelling like diesel exhaust and cheap sweat." I grabbed the silver thermos from the granite counter. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her that the mortgage on this 5-bedroom house in Greenwich was paid mostly by the grueling 60-hour weeks I worked. 3 years ago, when my logistics startup went under, I took the only job I could get to keep us afloat, driving a delivery truck for my former competitor. Eleanor had never forgiven me for the downgrade in our social status. "Are you working late again?" she asked, her tone entirely devoid of concern. "Probably until 8, I lied smoothly. "Holiday rush. Fine. I have a late dinner with the board anyway. Don't wait up." She finally looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my worn steel-toed boots with undisguised disgust. I gave her a tired nod, played the role of the defeated, exhausted husband perfectly, and walked out the door. The moment I sat in the driver's seat of my stepvan, the heavy, slumped posture vanished. I locked the doors, pulled out a secondary burner phone from the glove compartment, and turned it on. The screen lit up with 3 new notifications. One was a bank alert, a withdrawal of $4,000 from our joint savings account. The second was a GPS notification. Eleanor's Range Rover had just left the driveway, heading not toward the country club for her supposed committee meeting, but straight toward downtown Stamford. The third was a text message from a private investigator I had hired 6 months ago. It read, "The final wire transfer cleared. The shell company is fully funded. The trap is set." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile that I never let Eleanor see. She thought I was stupid. She thought my job was a humiliating joke. She had no idea that being a delivery driver gave me the ultimate invisibility cloak. Nobody looks twice at the mailman. Nobody questions a guy in a brown uniform walking into a corporate building, carrying a clipboard, or lingering outside a residential gate. For the past 8 months, I had known about Julian. Julian Vance was a hotshot real estate developer. 39, slick, driving a Porsche, and aggressively charming. He was also the man Eleanor had been sleeping with in cheap hotel rooms while I was out hauling packages in the freezing rain. But the affair wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that they were systematically draining my retirement accounts to fund Julian's failing commercial project in downtown Stamford. Eleanor had forged my signature on 3 different equity loans against our house. She thought she had outsmarted the blue-collar loser. She didn't know I had spent every single lunch break sitting in my truck, meticulously building a financial guillotine, with the help of a ruthless forensic accountant. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the neighborhood. My route today was special. It wasn't my usual residential loop. Today I had requested a shift in territory. My first stop was a towering glass office building on Atlantic Street, Julian Vance's headquarters. I loaded a heavy cardboard box onto my dolly. It was marked confidential legal files and required a direct signature. I pushed through the revolving doors, my boots squeaking slightly on the polished marble floors. The receptionist, a young woman with too much makeup, barely glanced at me. "Delivery for Mr. Vance," I said, tapping the clipboard. "Needs his personal signature." "He's in a meeting," she said, chewing her gum. "Leave it here. Sender specified direct handover, ma'am. High-value legal documents. If I don't get his signature, it goes back to the sender in Chicago, and he won't get it until Tuesday." She rolled her eyes and picked up her phone. "Mr. Vance? The courier is insisting on a signature for a legal box." A pause. "Yes, sir, I'll send him in." She pointed to the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. I pushed the dolly forward, my heart beat steadily. There was no panic, only a sharp, hyper-focused anticipation. I pushed open the door to Julian's office. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, wearing a tailored navy suit. And sitting on the edge of his desk, laughing at something he had just said, was Eleanor. She was supposed to be at a charity meeting. Instead, she was here, wearing the diamond earrings I bought her for our 20th anniversary. Her head snapped toward the door. When she saw me, all the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She froze completely. Julian looked annoyed, entirely oblivious to who I was. He had never met me. To him, I was just a nameless drone in a brown shirt. "Put it on the table," Julian barked, waving a hand dismissively. "And give me the damn clipboard." I didn't look at Eleanor. I kept my eyes fixed on Julian, maintaining the dull, subservient expression of an overworked driver. I wheeled the box over, picked up the clipboard, and held it out to him. Eleanor was trembling. I could see her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the desk. She was waiting for the explosion. She was waiting for me to scream, to throw a punch, to tear the room apart. I did absolutely nothing. "Sign on the highlighted line, sir," I said, my voice perfectly polite and even. Julian scribbled his name, shoved the clipboard back against my chest, and turned his attention back to my wife. "Anyway, as I was saying, once the final transfer hits tomorrow, we close on the waterfront property." "Thank you, sir," I said. "Have a great day." I turned my back on them and walked out. I didn't glance back. I didn't break character. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped into the elevator and pulled it out. It was a frantic, terrified text from Eleanor. "Arthur, please, let me explain." I stared at the screen as the elevator descended. She was panicking now. She thought her secret was out, that the game was over. But she was wrong. The game wasn't over. It was just entering the final phase. I typed a reply, keeping my hands perfectly steady. "Explain what? I was just doing my job. See you at home for dinner." I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and stepped out into the cold morning air. I had 12 more deliveries to make today. And the very last one was going to be the most devastating package Julian Vance had ever received. I killed the engine of my rusted Honda Civic in the driveway. The delivery van was parked back at the depot, but my muscles still ached from hauling boxes all day. I sat in the dark for exactly 30 seconds, letting my face fall into the perfect mask of a beaten, exhausted, middle-aged man. Then, I grabbed my empty lunch cooler and walked up to the front door. The moment I turned the key in the lock, the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary hit me. Eleanor never cooked. For the past 3 years, our dinners consisted of expensive takeout, or whatever I managed to microwave, after a 14-hour shift. Tonight, however, the dining table was set. 2 wine glasses caught the light of the chandelier. "Arthur, is that you?" Her voice came from the kitchen. It was an octave higher than usual. Tight. Strained. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. I let my boots thud heavily against the hardwood floor as I walked into the kitchen. Eleanor was standing by the stove, clutching a wooden spoon like it was a weapon. She had changed out of the designer dress I saw her wearing in Julian's office. Now she wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, playing the role of the devoted homemaker waiting for her weary husband. Her eyes darted over my face, searching desperately for any sign of anger, any hint that I had connected the dots. "Something smells good," I said, my voice thick with fake exhaustion. I slumped into a chair at the kitchen island and rubbed my temples. "I am completely dead on my feet," she exhaled. It was a microscopic movement, but I saw the tension drain from her shoulders. She poured a glass of red wine and slid it across the marble counter toward me. "You work too hard," she said smoothly. The panic from this morning was already fading, replaced by her usual condescending tone. "How was your route today? You said you had a different territory. She was testing the waters, pushing to see if I had recognized her. I took a slow sip of the wine. Downtown Stamford. It was a nightmare. No parking, stuck in traffic, and I had to haul a heavy box of legal files up to some arrogant suit in a penthouse office. Eleanor froze, the wine bottle hovering over her own glass. Oh? Who was it? I don't know, some guy named Vance or something, I muttered, shaking my head and staring blankly at the counter. Didn't even look at me? Treated me like a piece of furniture. Handed me the clipboard like I was dirt. People like that make me sick. A slow, victorious smile crept onto Eleanor's face. She turned her back to me to put the bottle away, but I caught the reflection of her smirk in the dark glass of the oven window. She genuinely believed I was that stupid. She believed that I could walk into an office, see my own wife sitting on another man's desk, and completely fail to register it because I was too blinded by my own blue-collar misery. Well, you know how corporate people are, Eleanor said, her confidence fully restored. She walked over and patted my shoulder, a gesture so cold and hollow it made my skin crawl. They live in a different world, Arthur. You can't let it get to you. I guess not, I replied. She walked over to her designer handbag sitting on the dining chair and pulled out a manila folder. She placed it right next to my wine glass. Listen, while I have you here, I need your signature on this, she said casually. It is just a standard insurance update for the house. The premium went up, and the broker needs both our names to authorize the new payment plan. I looked down at the paper. It was not an insurance update. It was an authorization form for a final, massive wire transfer. It was the key to draining the last $300,000 of equity we had left in the house. She had hidden the real document under a fake cover sheet, leaving only the signature line exposed at the bottom. 4 months ago, my private investigator, a former fraud detective named Marcus, warned me this day would come. Marcus had helped me set up a digital shadow on all my accounts. We knew exactly how much she had stolen. We knew exactly where it was going. And we knew that she would need one final physical signature to clear the largest hurdle at the bank. Marcus had told me to refuse. He told me to lock the accounts down immediately. But I refused. I wanted her to take it all. I wanted her to transfer every single dime into Julian Vance's shell company. Because of the moment that money crossed state lines into his fraudulent real estate venture, it ceased to be a simple marital dispute. It became a federal financial crime. Do I need to read the fine print? I asked, pulling a cheap plastic pen from my shirt pocket. Oh, please, Arthur, don't be dramatic, she sighed, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernail on the X. I already read it. Just sign it so I can mail it tomorrow morning. I handle all the finances anyway because you are always working. Right. Always working. I clicked the pen. I pressed the tip to the paper and signed my name. Eleanor snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. Her eyes gleamed with raw, unfiltered greed. She had done it. She had finally bled me dry. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, she said, her voice practically singing. Go wash your hands. I stood up, gave her a tired nod, and walked upstairs to our bedroom. I closed the door, walked into the master bathroom, and turned the shower on full blast. The noise of the rushing water drowned out everything else. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket and dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring. She took the bait, I said softly over the sound of the water. I just signed the final authorization. You are a madman, Arthur. Marcus chuckled on the other end. I have the banking monitors up right now. The moment she submits that paper tomorrow, the funds will route to Julian's dummy corporation. But here is the beautiful part. I already filed the injunction under seal. When the bank tries to clear the funds at noon tomorrow, the trap snaps shut. Julian's entire corporate account will be frozen, and the deed to his new property will be flagged for fraud. And Eleanor? I asked. Eleanor is listed as a co-conspirator on the wire transfer, Marcus replied. When the dust settles tomorrow, she will own absolutely nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even the car. Perfect. Have the serving papers ready for tomorrow afternoon. I want it done publicly. I hung up the phone, stripped off my work clothes, and stepped into the shower. The hot water washed away the grime of the day, but it could not wash away the cold anticipation settling in my chest. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Eleanor was breathing evenly beside me. At around 2 in the morning, I felt her stir. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing heavy, playing the role of the deep sleeper. The mattress shifted. Eleanor slipped out of bed, grabbed her phone from the nightstand, and padded softly out of the bedroom. I waited exactly 10 seconds before I silently threw off the covers and followed her. I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows. Down below, standing in the kitchen, illuminated only by the light of the open refrigerator, Eleanor was whispering frantically into her phone. "Julian, it is me," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "He signed it. The idiot actually signed it without looking. Yes, I am dropping it off at the bank at 9 o'clock sharp." A pause. She laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet house. "I know. I can't believe it either. He was right there in your office today, delivering boxes like a trained monkey, and he had no idea. Tomorrow, we are finally done with him. Tomorrow, we start our real life." I stood in the darkness, listening to my wife of 25 years plan my complete destruction. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt an overwhelming sense of calm. She hung up the phone and closed the refrigerator door. I turned around and walked silently back to bed. Tomorrow, Eleanor was going to drop that paper off at the bank. Tomorrow, she was going to pack her expensive bags and walk out the door to meet her new lover. But what she didn't know was that tomorrow, her entire world was going to collapse, and I was going to be the one holding the hammer.
"Load the truck, Arthur. You are falling behind."
My supervisor, a kid named Greg who barely looked old enough to shave, slapped the side of my delivery van. I did not snap back at him. I just nodded, wiped the sweat from my forehead and tossed the last heavy box into the back of the truck. "Sorry, Greg. Left knee is acting up today," I lied, keeping my voice mild and defeated. "Just get it done." "No overtime approved for this route," he barked, walking away with his clipboard. I pulled myself into the driver's seat, shut the heavy metal door, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, shaking the entire dashboard. The moment I was out of the depot yard and onto the main road, the defeated old man persona evaporated completely. I sat up straight, pulled my burner phone from my pocket, and dialed Marcus. He picked up instantly. The sound of rapid typing echoed in the background. "Tell me you are watching the board," Marcus said. "I am driving. Give me the update," I replied, keeping my eyes on the morning traffic. "Eleanor is in the bank lobby right now. I have eyes on her through the public traffic cameras across the street. She just walked through the glass doors, holding that manila folder you signed last night. She is early. She must be eager to ruin your life. Let her." "What about Julian?" "Julian is bleeding," Marcus laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "I did a deep dive into his shell company overnight. He is not just buying a waterfront property, Arthur. He is trying to cover massive debts. He owes $3 million to some very unforgiving private lenders in New York. If he does not close this waterfront deal today and use the property as collateral, those lenders are going to destroy him. He is desperate. He needs Eleanor's money to clear the escrow hurdle. So when the wire freezes at noon, Julian defaults," Marcus finished the thought. "His lenders will seize his corporate accounts, but guess what? Because Eleanor tied her name to the fraudulent wire transfer as a co-investor, she goes down with his sinking ship. The federal injunction I filed will lock everything tight. They will both be trapped in a financial cage with no exits. Make sure the serving papers are ready for this afternoon," I said, my voice cold. "Already printed. Enjoy your route, Arthur. I will text you when the vault locks." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I had a full truck today, mostly residential deliveries in the upscale neighborhoods where Eleanor and her friends spent their time. It was a poetic kind of justice. At 10 o'clock I pulled up to the Oak Ridge Country Club. The sprawling green lawns were perfectly manicured and a dozen luxury cars were parked near the clubhouse. I grabbed a small package destined for the pro shop and walked up the stone path. Before I even reached the door, I heard a high-pitched voice calling my name. "Arthur? Oh my God, Arthur, is that you?" I stopped and turned. Sitting at a patio table with a cup of coffee was Linda. She was Eleanor's best friend, a wealthy widow who spent her days gossiping and judging everyone who drove a car older than 3 years. She looked me up and down, taking in my dirty brown uniform, my scuffed boots, and the barcode scanner clipped to my belt. Her face contorted into a mask of exaggerated pity. "Hello, Linda," I said quietly. Eleanor told me you were still doing this delivery thing, Linda said, waving a hand vaguely at my uniform. She is so worried about you, Arthur. She really is. She told me yesterday at lunch that your mind just has not been the same since your business closed. She said you get confused easily. I stared at her. Eleanor had not just stolen my money. She was actively building a narrative that I was losing my mind. She was setting the stage so that when I finally realized the money was gone, nobody would believe me. They would just think I was a confused, broken old man who mismanaged his own accounts. It was brilliant, and it was pure evil. I am just tired, Linda, I said, playing right into the narrative. I let my shoulders slump. I looked at the ground. Long hours. Hard to keep track of things sometimes. Linda sighed dramatically and placed a hand over her heart. Well, you are so lucky to have Eleanor. She is handling all the stress of the finances, so you do not have to worry. She even told me she is making some investments to secure your retirement because you cannot work like a mule forever. You should thank her every single day. I will, I said softly. I will give her exactly what she deserves. You do that. Linda smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. Now go on, do not let me keep you from your little boxes. I walked into the pro shop, dropped off the package, and walked back to my truck. I did not feel humiliated. I did not feel angry. Every condescending word out of Linda's mouth was just fuel for the fire I was about to unleash. I climbed into the van and checked my burner phone. A notification from the bank sat on the screen. Wire transfer authorization received. Pending final clearance. Hold applied until 12 p.m. Eastern. The final countdown had begun. I spent the next 2 hours driving mechanically. I dropped off dog food, clothing boxes, and electronics to massive houses. Every time I stopped the truck, I checked the digital clock on the dashboard. 11:30. 11:45. I finished my deliveries in the northern sector and pulled the empty van into a vacant parking lot overlooking the Stamford Harbor. The water was choppy and gray under the overcast sky. Across the water, I could see the empty lot where Julian Vance planned to build his luxury waterfront complex. The property he was buying with my life savings. I parked the truck and left the engine running to keep the heater on. I picked up my burner phone and placed it carefully on the dashboard. 11:55. My heart beat with a slow, heavy rhythm. I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the nights I came home freezing and exhausted, only to find Eleanor complaining about the brand of wine I bought. I thought about the forged signatures on the equity loans. I thought about Julian Vance, sitting at his mahogany desk, laughing at me. 11:58. I reached into my cooler and pulled out a bottle of water. I took a slow drink. 11:59. The digital numbers on the clock seemed to freeze. For 60 long seconds the world was completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the van engine, and the wind rattling the metal doors. 12 o'clock, noon. I stared at the burner phone. Nothing happened for 10 seconds. Then the screen lit up with a rapid series of notifications. The first was a bank alert. Wire transfer failure, account frozen by federal injunction. The second was a message from Marcus. The vault is locked. The bank just flagged Julian's receiving account for fraud. The money bounced back into the escrow holding, and the federal hold clamped down on it. It is done, Arthur. They are completely paralyzed. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had truly smiled in 3 years. The trap had snapped shut. Eleanor was at the bank, probably screaming at a teller right now, demanding to know why the funds did not clear. Julian was probably sitting in his office, realizing his lenders were about to destroy him. I picked up the phone to call Marcus and tell him to send the process servers. Before I could unlock the screen, the phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. An incoming call. I looked at the caller ID and my smile vanished. My blood went completely cold. The name flashing on the screen of my secret burner phone was Julian Vance. He did not know this number. He did not know my name. To him, I was just a nameless delivery driver. So why was he calling the secret phone I used to destroy him? I stared at the ringing phone, my thumb hovering over the answer button. The game had just changed. The phone vibrated violently against my palm. The caller ID flashed the name Julian Vance. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds. He did not know my name. He did not know this number belonged to the husband of the woman he was sleeping with. Marcus must have listed this burner number on the federal injunction document as the contact for the claimant legal representative. Julian was desperate, and he was calling the only lifeline he could find on the paperwork. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. I just breathed quietly. "Listen to me," Julian said. His voice was completely frantic, stripped of all the arrogance I had heard in his office that morning. "I do not know who you are, but you have made a massive mistake. The wire transfer was completely legitimate." I kept my voice extremely low and dropped it a full octave, leaning into the persona of a cold corporate lawyer. "The federal hold is absolute, Mr. Vance," I said flatly. "Suspicion of wire fraud and unauthorized asset liquidation." "It is a clerical error," Julian yelled over the phone. I could hear papers being violently shoved across a desk. "My business partner made a mistake on the routing forms. Look, I need that money cleared by 1 o'clock or my commercial lenders are going to seize my property. If you lift the hold right now, I will wire $50,000 directly to you as a processing fee. Nobody has to know." I smiled in the empty cabin of my delivery truck. Julian Vance, the slick real estate mogul, was offering a flat-out bribe to a man he thought was a federal compliance officer. And because Marcus had set up this burner phone with an automatic recording app, I now had a felony bribery attempt saved directly to a cloud server. "Bribing a federal agent carries a 10-year minimum sentence, Mr. Vance," I said slowly. "No, wait, I did not mean it like that," Julian stammered, the panic in his voice escalating to sheer terror. "Just tell me how to fix this, please." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I did not have time to celebrate. I put the van in gear, pulled out of the harbor parking lot, and drove straight toward downtown Stamford. The bank where Eleanor was trying to execute the transfer was only 10 minutes away. I parked the delivery van across the street from the First National branch. The rain had started to fall, smearing the windshield. But I had a clear view through the massive glass windows of the bank lobby. Eleanor was standing at the desk of the branch manager. She was not acting like the refined, wealthy housewife anymore. She was waving her arms aggressively. The manager was shaking his head and holding up his hands in a defensive posture. A moment later, a uniformed security guard stepped forward and placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She shoved the guard away, snatched her designer handbag off the desk, and stormed out of the glass doors. She stood on the wet sidewalk, digging furiously into her bag. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number. I rolled down my window just a fraction to listen to the street noise. She was pacing back and forth, holding the phone to her ear. She was calling Julian. But Julian was not answering. He was probably too busy panicking in his office, trying to figure out how to stop his lenders from destroying him. Eleanor let out a scream of frustration and slammed her phone against the brick wall of the bank. The screen shattered. She dropped the broken pieces onto the sidewalk and grabbed her hair. Then, she looked across the street. Her eyes scanned the row of parked cars and locked dead onto my brown delivery van. She knew my route. She knew I drove this exact model. For a second, she just stared at the truck. Then, she marched directly across the busy street, ignoring the blaring horns of oncoming traffic. I quickly grabbed my regular cell phone from my pocket and pretended to review a digital delivery manifest. I kept my face perfectly blank. The passenger door of the van was yanked open. Eleanor climbed in, bringing the smell of cold rain and expensive perfume into the cab. Her chest was heaving, her face was pale, and her perfectly styled hair was a mess. "Arthur," she gasped, completely out of breath, "I need your phone, right now." I looked at her, blinking slowly, playing the role of the confused, slow-witted husband. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? I thought you were at the country club." "I said, give me the damn phone, Arthur," she screamed, slapping her hand hard against the dashboard. "My phone broke, and I need to make an emergency call." I did not argue. I handed her my regular cell phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial the numbers. She put the phone on speaker and held it between us. The line rang twice before Julian picked up. "Hello?" Julian barked. "Julian, it is me," Eleanor said, her voice cracking with desperation. "I am using Arthur's phone. The bank completely locked me out. The manager said there is a federal injunction on the transfer, and they froze your receiving account too. What is happening?" Julian did not sound relieved to hear from her. He sounded absolutely lethal. I know what is happening, you stupid woman, Julian hissed through the speaker. The fraud department just emailed me the legal notice. Do you know who filed the injunction on my account? Do you know who tracked the money? No, Eleanor cried. Who is it? Is it the IRS? It is a corporate creditor, Julian yelled. A company called Apex Logistics. They placed a massive lien on your assets this morning, and because you tied your name to my company on the wire transfer, the lien infected my accounts too. You brought your garbage into my house, Eleanor. Who the hell is Apex Logistics? Eleanor froze. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. She slowly lowered the phone. She knew exactly who Apex Logistics was. It was the name of my former logistics company, the business that went bankrupt 3 years ago. Julian hung up, leaving the dial tone echoing in the quiet cabin of the van. Eleanor turned her head and looked at me. She did not suspect that I was the mastermind. She did not know I had secretly kept Apex Logistics alive as a shell corporation just to execute this exact trap. She just thought that the old debts from my failed business had suddenly resurfaced, ruining her perfect plan to steal my money. She thought I was still just a pathetic loser whose past mistakes had accidentally destroyed her future. Arthur, she whispered, her voice shaking with a terrifying, suppressed rage. Did you ever officially dissolve the legal entity for Apex Logistics? I looked down at the steering wheel and rubbed the back of my neck. I forced my voice to sound ashamed and weak. I do not know, Eleanor. The lawyers were too expensive. I just let the paperwork expire. Did something happen? Did something happen? She repeated, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Your old creditors just seized our entire life savings, Arthur. Everything is gone because you are too stupid to file a piece of paper. I looked up at her with wide, panicked eyes. What do you mean everything is gone? What were you doing at the bank? She did not answer my question. Her mind was already racing, calculating her next move. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging painfully through the fabric of my uniform. Listen to me carefully, Arthur, she commanded, her eyes burning with a manic intensity. We can still fix this. If you sign over full executive control of the old Apex Corporation to me right now, my lawyer can file an emergency block to protect the remaining assets. We are going to a notary right this second. I stared at her, gripping my arm. She was completely trapped in her own greed. She thought she was finding a loophole to steal the money back, but she had no idea she was about to willingly sign her name to a document that would make her personally liable for every single piece of fraud committed today. Okay, Eleanor, I said softly, starting the engine. Let us go to the notary. The tires of the delivery van screeched against the wet asphalt as I pulled into a dilapidated strip mall. Eleanor did not wait for the truck to come to a complete stop. She shoved the heavy passenger door open and jumped out into the freezing rain, clutching my cell phone like a lifeline. Hurry up, Arthur, she screamed over her shoulder. We do not have all day. I turned off the engine, pulled the keys from the ignition, and followed her. My brown uniform was quickly soaked by the rain, but I kept my posture slumped, playing the role of the terrified, confused husband perfectly. She marched toward a storefront with a flickering neon sign that read Public Notary and Legal Services. She pushed the glass door open so hard it slammed against the interior wall. Inside, an older man with thick glasses and a gray sweater looked up from behind a cluttered desk. He blinked at us, clearly startled by Eleanor's dramatic entrance. I need a corporate transfer of directorship notarized right this second, Eleanor demanded, slamming her designer handbag onto his desk. My lawyer just emailed the document to my phone. I need you to print it and stamp it. The old man frowned. Ma'am, I charge a $20 printing fee for emailed documents, and I need to see 2 forms of identification from both parties. I do not care what you charge, she snapped. Print the damn paper. She tapped furiously on my phone screen, forwarding the email her lawyer had rushed over. The old man sighed, clicked his mouse a few times, and the printer in the corner began to hum. I stood near the door, water dripping from my uniform onto the cheap carpet. I looked at Eleanor. She was pacing the small room like a caged animal. She was so blinded by the need to save her stolen millions that she was not thinking straight. She genuinely believed my old company, Apex Logistics, was just a dead business with a few lingering creditors. She thought taking control of it would allow her lawyer to dissolve the legal lien against Julian's accounts. She had no idea that Marcus had spent the last 6 months turning Apex Logistics into a financial black hole, designed specifically to swallow anyone who claimed ownership of it. The printer stopped. The notary picked up the warm sheet of paper and adjusted his glasses. He read the top paragraph and his frown deepened. He looked at me, then back at Eleanor. "Ma'am, I am required by state law to make sure both parties understand what they are signing," the old man said, his voice slow and cautious. "This is an absolute assumption of liability document. You are not just taking over the title of the company. You are claiming full personal responsibility for all past, present, and future debts, liens, and federal inquiries associated with Apex Logistics." "I know what the document says," Eleanor hissed. "I am the one who had my lawyer draft it." "Are you entirely sure?" the notary pressed, looking directly at me with a hint of sympathy. "Sir, you are signing over everything, and ma'am, if this company has any pending legal action, this signature means they can come after your personal house, your cars, and your private bank accounts. You are stripping away your corporate protection." I swallowed hard, making sure my Adam's apple bobbed nervously. I looked at Eleanor with wide, fearful eyes. "Eleanor, maybe he is right," I stammered, keeping my voice shaky and weak. "Maybe we should wait and talk to my old accountant. What if the creditors take the house?" "Shut up, Arthur," she yelled, stepping closer to me. Her eyes were wide, completely consumed by greed and panic. "You have already ruined everything with your stupidity. I am fixing it. If we do not sign this right now, we lose everything anyway. Do not argue with me. Just sign the paper." I looked down at the floor, letting my shoulders drop in total defeat. Okay, Eleanor, whatever you say." I walked over to the desk. The notary slid the paper toward me. He looked like he wanted to stop me, but he knew he could not interfere with a domestic financial decision. I picked up the cheap plastic pen. My hand trembled slightly, a final touch of acting for my wife's benefit. I pressed the tip to the paper and signed my name on the line, transferring my dead company directly to her. Eleanor snatched the pen from my hand the second I was done. She practically threw herself over the desk to sign her own name on the assumption of liability line. Her signature was fast, aggressive, and perfectly clear. "Stamp it," she ordered the notary. The old man shook his head slowly. He picked up his heavy metal stamp, pressed it into the ink pad, and brought it down hard on the paper. A loud, solid thud echoed in the small room. The sound was music to my ears. It was the sound of the trap locking permanently into place. Eleanor did not even say thank you. She threw a $50 bill onto the desk, grabbed the stamped document, and stormed out the door. I followed her back out into the rain. She did not get back into the delivery van. She stood on the sidewalk, holding the paper over her head to protect it from the rain, and dialed a number on my phone. She put it on speaker so she could navigate the automated menu of her lawyer's office. But the phone did not connect to her lawyer. Before the call could even go through, an incoming call overrode the screen. It was Julian Vance. Eleanor gasped in relief and answered it immediately, keeping it on speakerphone. "Julian," she practically screamed over the sound of the rain. "I have it. I have the signed transfer. Arthur is a complete idiot. He just handed the whole company over to me. I am calling my lawyer right now to dissolve the Apex lien. The bank will release your accounts in an hour." There was no sigh of relief on the other end of the line. There was no praise. There was only the sound of heavy, panicked breathing and the distinct wail of police sirens in the background. "Julian?" Eleanor asked, her smile slowly fading. "Julian, where are you? You stupid, arrogant woman." Julian's voice came through the speaker. It did not sound slick or charming anymore. It sounded broken. "You cannot dissolve the lien." "Yes, I can," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising in panic. "I am the sole executive director of Apex Logistics now. I have the notarized paper right in my hand." "Apex Logistics is not a dead company, Eleanor," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "My lawyers just pulled the federal injunction filing. Apex Logistics is fully funded. It is an active shell corporation that holds a massive insurance policy on your husband's life savings, and the federal judge who signed the injunction did not do it because of old business debts." Eleanor froze. The hand holding the notarized document began to shake. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "The injunction was filed for wire fraud. Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, hollow whisper. Somebody handed the FBI a complete dossier of every single bank transfer you made over the last 6 months. They know about the forged signatures on the equity loans. They know you stole the money from Arthur to fund my project. Eleanor could not speak. The rain plastered her hair to her face. And Eleanor, Julian continued, sounding like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Because you just signed that paper claiming full legal responsibility for Apex Logistics. You just tied yourself directly to the federal fraud investigation. The commercial lenders did not just seize my building. They called the authorities. Federal agents just walked into my office lobby. Eleanor dropped my phone on the wet asphalt. She stood frozen in the rain, staring blankly at the brick wall of the strip mall. The notarized document in her hand slowly became soaked, the ink bleeding into a useless blue smear. But it did not matter. The original digital copy was already logged in the notary's system. She was bound to it, forever. I stood 3 feet away from her, the rain washing the dirt from my brown uniform. I did not slump my shoulders anymore. I stood tall, my back completely straight. I reached down, picked up my phone from the puddle, and wiped the screen on my sleeve. I looked at my wife, letting the fake mask of the exhausted, beaten delivery driver fall away completely. For the first time in 3 years, I let her see the cold, calculating man she had married. "Get in the truck, Eleanor," I said. My voice was no longer weak. It was sharp, heavy, and completely in control. "We need to go home. We are expecting guests. Put your seatbelt on, Eleanor. It is against the law to ride without one." I did not yell. I did not even look at her. I just stared straight ahead through the windshield, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel of the delivery van. Eleanor sat frozen in the passenger seat, dripping wet, her expensive cashmere sweater ruined by the rain. She stared at me like she was looking at a complete stranger. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. The absolute terror in her eyes was something I had waited months to see. I put the van in drive and pulled out of the strip mall parking lot. The drive back to our house in Greenwich usually took 30 minutes. Today it felt like 5. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. I could hear Eleanor's rapid, shallow breathing over the sound of the heater. Every time I stopped at a red light, I could feel her eyes burning into the side of my face. She was desperately trying to calculate what had just happened. She was trying to figure out if I was a criminal mastermind, or just an incredibly lucky idiot, whose old business had somehow destroyed her life. She did not want to believe the former. Her ego simply would not allow it. "Arthur," she finally whispered as we turned onto our street. Her voice was shaking so badly, it barely sounded human. "Arthur, what did you do?" "I delivered packages," I replied flatly. "That is what you told everyone I do, right? I am just a confused old man hauling boxes." She flinched as if I had hit her. She realized I had heard her conversation with Linda at the country club. The wall of her deception was cracking, and she had no idea how to stop it. I pulled the van into our long, winding driveway. Parked right in front of the massive oak doors of our house was a sleek black Lexus. Eleanor sat up, panic flashing across her face again. "Whose car is that?" "Arthur, did you call the police?" "I did not have to," I said, turning off the engine. "Get out." I did not wait for her. I stepped out into the freezing rain and walked up to the front door. I unlocked it and pushed it open. The house was warm and smelled faintly of expensive vanilla candles. It was the perfect picture of wealth and domestic peace. It made me absolutely sick. I walked straight into the formal dining room. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table was Marcus. He was wearing a sharp gray suit, sipping a cup of espresso from Eleanor's favorite china set. Spread out across the polished wood in front of him were dozens of financial documents, bank statements, and printed photographs. Eleanor walked into the room a few seconds behind me. When she saw a strange man sitting at her dining table drinking her coffee, her shock temporarily gave way to her usual aristocratic rage. "Who the hell are you?" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "Get out of my house right now, Arthur. Call security." Marcus did not even blink. He took another slow sip of his espresso and placed the cup gently on the saucer. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," Marcus said. His voice was smooth and professional. "My name is Marcus. I am a forensic accountant and a private investigator. I also happen to be the acting legal proxy for Apex Logistics, and as of 10 minutes ago, I work directly for you. Eleanor stopped dead in her tracks. The anger vanished, instantly replaced by the crushing reality of what she had just done at the notary. No, she breathed, shaking her head. No, you do not. I am dissolving that company. I am calling my lawyer. You can certainly try. Marcus smiled, leaning back in his chair. But your lawyer will tell you exactly what I am about to tell you. By signing that assumption of liability document, you bypassed corporate protection. You accepted Apex Logistics with all its current legal burdens. And its biggest legal burden right now is the federal wire fraud case it filed this morning against Julian Vance. Eleanor looked at Marcus, then turned slowly to look at me. I stood by the fireplace. I reached up and unbuttoned my soaked brown delivery shirt. I pulled it off, threw it directly into the burning fire, and stood there in my undershirt. You knew, Eleanor whispered, her knees visibly trembling. You knew about Julian. I have known about Julian for 8 months, I said. My voice echoed in the large, empty room. I knew about the hotel rooms in the city. I knew about the expensive dinners you charged to my credit cards. I knew about the 3 forged equity loans against this house. I watched you steal my retirement fund, dollar by dollar. Tears finally spilled over Eleanor's eyelashes, mixing with the rain on her face. Arthur, please. I was confused. Julian manipulated me. He told me it was a guaranteed investment. He told me we would double the money and I was going to put it all back into your account. I did it for us. I actually laughed. The sound was harsh and bitter. You did it for us? I repeated, walking slowly toward her. I was standing in the dark at the top of the stairs last night, Eleanor. I heard you laughing with him on the phone. I heard you call me a trained monkey. I heard you say that today was the day you were finally done with me. She clamped a hand over her mouth, a choked sob escaping her throat. She took a step back, hitting the edge of the marble kitchen island. There was nowhere left to run. There were no more lies she could spin. I had stripped away every single defense she had. I could have stopped you months ago, I continued, stopping right in front of her. I could have frozen the accounts the day you forged the first signature. But if I did that, it would just be a messy divorce. You would have hired a ruthless lawyer, cried in front of a judge, and walked away with half of everything I built. I was not going to let you do that. I gestured toward Marcus, who was quietly organizing his files. So I hired Marcus, I said. We kept Apex Logistics alive as a ghost entity. We used it to buy the debt on Julian's commercial properties through a third-party broker. Every time you transferred my money to Julian, you were actually funneling it into a trap I controlled. And today, when you tried to execute the final wire transfer, Marcus dropped the hammer. He flagged the transaction for fraud on behalf of Apex Logistics. Eleanor slid down the side of the counter, collapsing onto the hardwood floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. And then you panicked, I said softly, looking down at her. You let your greed take over. You thought taking control of my dead company would let you release the money. You thought I was just a stupid delivery driver. But all you did was sign a legally binding confession. You made yourself the sole director of a company that is currently cooperating with a federal fraud investigation against your boyfriend. Please, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Please, Arthur, do not do this. I will sign the house over to you. I will give you whatever you want. Just tell them to drop the charges. It is out of my hands, Eleanor, I said, feeling absolutely nothing for the woman crying on my floor. I do not own Apex Logistics anymore. You do. The federal agents are not coming for me. They are coming for the executive director of the company involved in the wire fraud. Before she could respond, the heavy chime of our front doorbell rang through the house. It rang once, twice. Then came a loud, aggressive series of knocks against the heavy oak wood. Marcus checked his gold wristwatch and stood up from the dining table. He picked up his briefcase and straightened his tie. Right on time, Marcus said calmly. I believe that is the Financial Crimes Division, along with the process server for your divorce filings. Shall I go let them in, Arthur? I looked down at Eleanor. She was completely broken, staring at the front door, as if a monster was waiting on the other side. Go ahead, Marcus, I said. Do not keep our guests waiting. Marcus turned the brass handle and pulled the heavy oak door open. Standing on the porch were 3 people. The first was a young man holding a thick manila envelope. Behind him stood a man and a woman wearing dark rain jackets. Printed across the chest of their jackets in dull yellow letters was the acronym FBI. The young man stepped into the foyer first. He looked down at Eleanor, who was still sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching her knees to her chest. "Eleanor?" the young man asked. She did not answer. She just stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. The young man dropped the thick manila envelope directly onto her lap. "You have been served. Those are the preliminary divorce filings and a temporary restraining order regarding all marital assets." He turned and walked out the door without another word. Eleanor looked down at the envelope as if it were a bomb, but the real explosion was just walking through the door. The two federal agents stepped into the house. The woman pulled a leather badge holder from her belt and held it up. "Eleanor, I am Special Agent Miller with the Financial Crimes Division," the woman said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "We have a federal warrant to seize all electronic devices in this house, and a subpoena for your immediate appearance at the Stamford field office. You are currently the primary suspect in an ongoing wire fraud and racketeering investigation." Eleanor scrambled backward, her back hitting the kitchen cabinets. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "No," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You have the wrong person. It is him. Arthur planned all of this. He owns the company that filed the fraud claim. He set me up to take the fall for his failing business." Agent Miller did not even blink. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it and held it down for Eleanor to see. I recognized the blue ink immediately. It was a printed copy of the digital document Eleanor had just signed at the strip mall notary. "According to the state registry updated exactly 40 minutes ago, you are the sole executive director of Apex Logistics," Agent Miller said flatly. "You signed a full assumption of liability. You legally claimed ownership of the entity involved in the fraudulent wire transfers. Now, you can come with us quietly, or I can put you in handcuffs, right here in your beautiful kitchen. Your choice." Eleanor looked at the paper. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, wheezing sound came out. The absolute reality of her situation finally crushed the last remaining ounce of her arrogance. She slowly pushed herself off the floor. She did not look at me. She did not look at Marcus. She kept her eyes glued to the hardwood floor as the male agent escorted her out the front door and into the back of a black SUV. Agent Miller turned to me. "Arthur, as the victim on record for the stolen equity funds, we need you down at the field office to give an official statement," she said. "Your proxy, Marcus, has already provided the financial logs, but we need your verbal confirmation." "We will follow right behind you, Agent Miller," Marcus said smoothly, picking up his briefcase from the dining table. An hour later, Marcus and I walked through the glass doors of the federal building in downtown Stamford. The atmosphere was cold, clinical, and completely unforgiving. An agent escorted us down a long, fluorescent-lit hallway and into a small observation room. Through the one-way glass, I had a clear view into a large conference room. Eleanor was sitting on one side of a metal table. Her wet hair was plastered to her face, and her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark streaks. Sitting directly across from her was Julian Vance. Julian looked like a cornered animal. His expensive navy suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and he was sweating profusely. Sitting next to him was a gray-haired man in a sharp pinstripe suit. Marcus leaned close to me and whispered that the gray-haired man was Richard Sterling, one of the most ruthless and expensive defense attorneys in New York. Agent Miller walked into the conference room and dropped a massive stack of banking records onto the table. "Let us get started," Agent Miller said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Julian Vance, your commercial accounts were frozen this morning due to a direct link to stolen residential equity funds. Eleanor, you initiated the wire transfer. I want to know exactly who orchestrated the forgery on the equity loans." Before Eleanor could even open her mouth, Julian's lawyer leaned forward. "My client had absolutely no knowledge of any forged documents, Agent Miller," Sterling said, his voice dripping with smooth confidence. "Julian Vance is a legitimate real estate developer. He was approached by this woman, who presented herself as a wealthy, independent investor looking to back his waterfront project. If the money she wired to his company was stolen from her husband, that is a domestic dispute. My client is a victim of her deception. Eleanor's head snapped up. She stared at Julian, her jaw dropping in sheer disbelief. A victim? Eleanor gasped. Julian, what are you talking about? You told me exactly how to forge the signatures. You gave me the name of the corrupt loan officer who pushed the paperwork through. Julian refused to look at her. He stared straight ahead at the blank wall, his jaw tight. Do not speak to my client, Sterling snapped at Eleanor. You lied to him. You used him. You are a desperate housewife who stole her husband's retirement because you wanted to play the role of a big-time corporate player. My client trusted you, and you brought federal agents to his door. I watched through the glass as Eleanor's entire world shattered into a million pieces. She had sacrificed her 25-year marriage, her home, her reputation, and her freedom for a man she thought loved her. She thought they were going to start a glamorous new life together. But sitting in this cold room, Julian was swatting her away like a diseased insect. He did not care about her. He only ever cared about the money. You liar, Eleanor screamed, slamming her fists onto the metal table. You begged me for that money. You told me your commercial lenders were going to kill you if you did not close the waterfront deal today. You said you loved me. Julian finally turned his head and looked at her. The expression on his face was pure, unadulterated disgust. I said what I needed to say to get the funding. Julian sneered, his voice cold and cruel. Look at yourself, Eleanor. You are 50 years old and you have never worked a day in your life. You really thought a man like me was going to run away with you? You were nothing but a convenient ATM, and now you are a convicted felon. Eleanor let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She lunged across the table, her hands reaching for Julian's throat. 2 federal agents immediately rushed into the room, grabbed Eleanor by the arms, and dragged her back into her chair. She fought them, kicking and screaming hysterically, tears pouring down her face. Marcus chuckled softly next to me in the observation room. There is no honor among thieves, Arthur. They are tearing each other apart, just like we planned. It is over, I said quietly, watching my wife sob into her hands. He just destroyed whatever defense she had left. But I was wrong. In the conference room, Attorney Sterling stood up and buttoned his jacket. He did not look rattled by Eleanor's outburst. In fact, he looked incredibly pleased. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve. Agent Miller, my client is fully prepared to cooperate and testify against Eleanor, Sterling said, sliding the paper across the table. But I believe you are looking at the wrong mastermind. Eleanor is clearly unstable. She does not have the intelligence to execute a sophisticated bank fraud. Agent Miller picked up the plastic sleeve. What is this, Mr. Sterling? That is a certified copy of a private email correspondence, Sterling said, his voice projecting clearly through the hidden microphones. It was sent to Julian's private server 3 months ago from Arthur's personal email account. In this email, Arthur explicitly authorizes the liquidation of his own home equity and outlines a plan to funnel the money into Julian's company to hide it from the IRS. Arthur is not a victim, Agent Miller. He is the architect of this entire scheme. My blood ran completely cold. Through the glass, Agent Miller read the document, her brow furrowed. She placed the paper back on the table and looked directly at the two-way mirror, knowing exactly where I was standing. Agent Davis, Miller said into her radio, go into the observation room and bring Arthur in here, right now. The door behind Marcus and me clicked open. A large federal agent stepped inside, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Arthur, the agent said heavily, we need you to step into the interrogation room. Take a seat, Arthur, Agent Miller commanded. The heavy metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor as I sat down. The interrogation room was freezing, smelling of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I sat at the end of the long steel table. To my left sat Eleanor, looking at me with a sickening mixture of terror and desperate hope. To my right sat Julian Vance and his high-priced defense attorney, Richard Sterling. Julian was no longer sweating. The smug, arrogant smirk had returned to his face. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his tailored navy suit. He genuinely believed he had just played a masterstroke. Agent Miller slid the clear plastic sleeve across the table toward me. Inside was a printed copy of an email. Mr. Sterling has submitted this document into federal evidence, Agent Miller said, her voice entirely neutral. It is an email originating from your personal account, sent to Julian Vance 3 months ago. In it, you explicitly detail a plan to liquidate your home equity to hide assets from an impending IRS audit. You instruct Julian to use your wife as a blind courier for the funds. I did not touch the paper. I did not even look at it. I kept my eyes locked on Julian. You really are a coward, I said quietly. Watch your mouth, Sterling snapped, leaning forward. You are looking at 10 years in federal prison for tax evasion, wire fraud, and framing my client. The digital footprint is irrefutable. You orchestrated this entire scheme because your logistics company went bankrupt and you could not pay your taxes. You used your own wife. Eleanor stared at me, her eyes wide. For a split second, I saw her mind calculating. If the FBI believed this forged email, she would no longer be the mastermind. She would just be a manipulated wife. She could walk away clean. She was perfectly willing to let me go to federal prison for a crime she committed, just to save her own skin. Before I could say a word, the heavy metal door clicked open. Marcus walked into the room. He carried his leather briefcase and wore a small, cold smile. Apologies for the interruption, Marcus said smoothly, taking the empty chair next to me. As the legal proxy for the claimant, Apex Logistics, I have the right to review any evidence submitted that pertains to the frozen accounts. Review whatever you want, Julian sneered. Your boss is going to jail. Marcus did not acknowledge Julian. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket, picked up the plastic sleeve, and held it up to the fluorescent light. He read the header of the email carefully. Fascinating, Marcus murmured. According to this digital timestamp, this email was sent from Arthur's account on October 14th at exactly 3:45 in the afternoon. That is correct, Sterling said confidently. We have the server logs to prove it. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick tablet. He woke the screen and tapped a few times. Agent Miller, my client currently works as a delivery driver for Peak Logistics, Marcus said, placing the tablet on the center of the table. Peak Logistics uses a centralized satellite tracking system for all their delivery vans. They also mandate continuous interior and exterior dashcam recording for insurance purposes. Julian's smirk faltered slightly. He uncrossed his arms. Marcus hit play on the tablet. The screen showed 2 video feeds side by side. One was a camera looking out over the hood of a brown delivery van. The other was a camera looking directly into the driver cabin. This is the unedited, time-stamped footage from Arthur's vehicle on October 14th at 3:45 in the afternoon, Marcus said, his voice ringing clearly in the silent room. Everyone at the table leaned in to look. The video showed my truck parked on the side of a busy highway in the pouring rain. The interior camera showed me sitting in the driver's seat, drenched in sweat and rainwater, holding a heavy steel tire iron. Both of my hands were clearly visible. There was no cell phone. There was no laptop. I was physically exhausted, covered in grease, actively trying to fix a blown tire while cars sped past me. As you can clearly see, Marcus continued, Arthur was nowhere near a computer. He was not holding a phone. He was wrestling with a lug nut on Interstate 95 at the exact second this email was supposedly drafted and sent from his personal account. Sterling frowned, adjusting his suit jacket. A scheduled send. He could have drafted it earlier and set a timer. A fair theory, Marcus smiled, swiping to the next screen on his tablet. Which is why I just pulled the IP routing data from the email header you submitted. It is a very sloppy forgery, Mr. Sterling. The sender used a basic spoofing software to mask the origin address, but they forgot to clear the local network gateway ping. The blood completely drained from Julian's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. This email, Marcus said, tapping the tablet screen with his pen, was routed through a private Wi-Fi network, specifically, a network registered to the penthouse suite of the Atlantic Street high-rise, Julian Vance's private residence. The room went dead silent. Marcus turned his head and looked directly at Attorney Sterling. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You just handed a forged digital document to a federal agent in the middle of a racketeering investigation. You just submitted fabricated evidence on the record. Sterling was a veteran lawyer. He knew exactly what this meant. Submitting forged evidence to the FBI was a felony. It was a fast track to disbarment and federal prison. Sterling stood up so fast his metal chair tipped over and crashed onto the floor. He did not look at Agent Miller. He did not look at me. He turned and glared down at Julian Vance with a look of pure, homicidal rage. "Julian," Sterling hissed through his teeth, "did you fabricate this document?" "No," Julian stammered, raising his hands defensively. "No, Richard, you have to listen to me. My IT guy handled the server transfer. He must have messed up the logs. Do not lie to me," Sterling roared, slamming his fist onto the table. "You told me this was a verified correspondence. You used me to launder a forged document into a federal investigation." Sterling quickly turned to Agent Miller. He raised both of his hands in the air, a universal sign of surrender. "Agent Miller, I am formally withdrawing my representation of Julian Vance, effective immediately," Sterling declared, his voice echoing in the small room. "I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this forgery. I was deliberately misled by my client. I will cooperate fully with the Bureau regarding the origin of that document." Sterling grabbed his briefcase, completely ignoring Julian's frantic pleas, and stormed out of the interrogation room. The heavy door slammed shut behind him. Julian was completely alone. He had no money. He had no lawyer. He was facing federal fraud charges, and he had just added evidence tampering and obstruction of justice to his list of crimes. He looked around the room like a trapped rat. Then his eyes locked onto Eleanor. "It was her," Julian yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my wife. "She had the keys to my apartment. She knew my Wi-Fi password. She forged the email to frame Arthur because she knew the accounts were frozen. She did it all." "You lying piece of garbage!" Eleanor screamed, jumping out of her chair. "I do not even know how to use spoofing software. I was at the bank all morning." "Sit down and shut up," Agent Miller barked. Her voice cracked like a whip, instantly silencing both of them. Agent Miller collected the forged email and handed it to a junior agent standing by the door. She then pulled a fresh manila folder from her own briefcase and dropped it directly in front of Eleanor. "Your victim narrative ends today, Eleanor," Agent Miller said coldly. Eleanor stared at the folder, trembling. "What is that?" "I told you everything. Julian manipulated me. I only stole the money to help him." "Did you?" Agent Miller asked, opening the folder. "Because while we were tracing the stolen equity funds moving into Julian's commercial shell company, we noticed a massive discrepancy. The math did not add up. Only 80% of Arthur's money actually made it to Julian." Julian frowned in confusion. Even I leaned forward. This was something Marcus had not told me. "Where did the rest go?" Julian demanded. Agent Miller slid a bank statement across the table. It had a massive, elaborate crest printed at the top. "It went to the Cayman Islands," Agent Miller said. "Specifically to a private offshore trust registered exclusively under Eleanor's maiden name. You were not just a blind fool in love, Eleanor. You were skimming 20% off the top of every single forged loan. You were stealing from your husband to fund Julian, and you were stealing from Julian to build your own private escape fund." I stared at the woman I had been married to for 25 years. She was not just a cheating wife. She was a calculated, ruthless thief who was perfectly willing to rob her own lover just as blindly as she robbed me. Eleanor could not speak. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "You stole from me," Julian whispered, his face twisting in absolute fury. "I risked federal prison to set up those accounts, and you were skimming my capital?" "It does not matter anymore," Agent Miller said, standing up. She looked at the two-way mirror and nodded once. "Because neither of you is walking out of this building." The heavy metal door clicked open again. A federal agent walked in, holding the arm of a man wearing a bright orange county jail jumpsuit. His wrists were handcuffed in front of him. Eleanor lowered her hands. When she saw the man in the orange jumpsuit, she let out a piercing, terrified scream. "David," Eleanor choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The man in the orange jumpsuit did not look at her. He shuffled into the room, the heavy metal chains around his ankles clinking sharply against the concrete floor. A federal agent guided him to a steel chair at the far end of the table. He sat down heavily and rubbed his face, looking exhausted and completely defeated. Julian stared at the man, his jaw dropping in pure horror. The arrogant smirk was entirely wiped from his face. I looked at Marcus. He leaned close to my ear, his eyes fixed on the man in the orange suit. "David Croft," Marcus whispered to me. "Senior loan officer at First National Bank." Agent Miller picked him up 48 hours ago on a separate embezzlement charge. We provided the tip that led to his arrest. Agent Miller opened a new folder on the table and pressed a button on a small black audio recorder. "State your name for the federal record," Agent Miller commanded. "David Croft," the man muttered, staring blankly at the blank concrete wall. "Mr. Croft, you are currently in federal custody. You have agreed to cooperate in this racketeering investigation in exchange for a recommendation of leniency regarding your own pending charges. Is that correct?" "Yes." Agent Miller pointed a pen at Julian and Eleanor. "Do you recognize the two individuals sitting across from you today?" Croft finally turned his head. He looked at Eleanor with mild disgust, then shifted his gaze to Julian. The fear in Julian's eyes was absolute and undeniable. "Yes," Croft said. "Julian Vance and Eleanor. I do not know her last name anymore. I processed 3 massive home equity loans for them over the last 8 months." "He is lying," Julian shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "I have never seen this man in my life. He is a convicted criminal trying to reduce his own sentence by dragging an innocent business owner into his mess." Agent Miller did not raise her voice. She simply looked at the large armed agent standing directly behind Julian. The agent placed a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder and pushed him violently back into his chair. "Speak again when you are not spoken to, Julian, and I will have you gagged and removed from this room," Agent Miller said coldly. She turned back to the loan officer. "Mr. Croft, please describe the exact nature of those loan approvals." Croft took a deep breath. "Julian approached me at a charity dinner last year. He knew I had a massive gambling debt. He offered to pay it off completely if I fast-tracked a series of equity loans on a luxury property in Greenwich. The property belonged to Arthur. I told Julian that Arthur had to be physically present with federal identification to sign the authorization forms." "And what did Julian say to that?" Agent Miller asked. "He laughed," Croft replied, his voice completely flat and hollow. "He said Arthur was a clueless delivery driver who worked 14-hour days and never even looked at his own mail. He said Eleanor would bring the papers in. Julian paid me $20,000 in cash to bypass the biometric verification protocol. Eleanor came into my office 3 separate times. I watched her forge Arthur's signature on all 3 documents. Eleanor let out a loud, miserable sob. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. She did not even try to deny it. She knew the game was completely over. Julian was hyperventilating. His chest heaved up and down. His slick, arrogant corporate persona was entirely gone. He was just a terrified, desperate criminal watching the walls of a federal prison close in around him. "There is more," Croft said, turning his attention directly to Julian. A dark, bitter smile crossed his face. "You thought you were so incredibly smart, Julian. You thought you controlled everyone. But you were not the only one playing games behind closed doors." Julian froze. His breathing stopped. "What do you mean by that, Mr. Croft?" Agent Miller asked. "Eleanor came to see me alone 2 months ago," Croft continued, his voice ringing loudly in the silent room. "She told me she knew Julian was planning to dump her the moment his commercial project was fully funded. She was terrified of being left with absolutely nothing. So she offered me another $10,000 to alter the final routing numbers on the wire transfers." Julian slowly turned his head to look at Eleanor. His eyes were wide with a sickening realization. She wanted 20% of every single forged loan diverted into a blind trust in the Cayman Islands before the rest of the money hit Julian's corporate account. Croft finished. "She was bleeding you dry, Julian, right under your nose." Julian let out a roar of absolute unhinged fury. He lunged across the metal table, his hands reaching desperately for Eleanor's throat. He knocked over chairs and scattered federal documents everywhere. He did not make it. The armed agent grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive suit, ripped him backward, and slammed him face first into the steel table. The agent pinned Julian's arms behind his back. The loud, sharp sound of metal handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed in the small room. Julian thrashed wildly against the table, his face purple with rage. "You stole from me!" Julian screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he stared violently at my wife. "I ruined my entire life for this project, and you stole my money. I am going to kill you, Eleanor. I am going to kill you." Eleanor did not fight back. She just cried hysterically, shrinking away from him in her chair, pressing her back against the concrete wall. "Take him out of here," Agent Miller ordered, stepping back from the table. 2 agents hauled Julian to his feet and dragged him toward the door. Julian fought them the entire way, screaming and cursing Eleanor until the heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting off his voice completely. The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Miller looked at Croft and nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. The guards will take you back to processing." Croft stood up, his chains rattling loudly, and was escorted out of the room by another agent. Now it was just Eleanor, Agent Miller, Marcus, and me. Eleanor sat entirely alone on her side of the table. She looked incredibly small. Her wet hair clung to her face, her expensive clothes were ruined, and her entire future had just been erased in less than 20 minutes. Agent Miller closed her file folder and stood up straight. "Eleanor," Agent Miller said, her tone carrying the terrifying finality of a judge passing a sentence. "You are formally under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit international money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." 2 female agents stepped into the interrogation room. They pulled Eleanor out of her chair. She did not resist at all. She let them pull her arms behind her back and snapped the cold metal handcuffs tightly around her wrists. As they turned her toward the door to take her away, she stopped. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were completely hollow, stripped of all the arrogance, greed, and entitlement she had worn like a crown for 25 years. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her. "I am going to federal prison. I know that now. I accept it. But when I eventually get out, I will still have half the house. The state cannot seize my half of the marital estate for a corporate crime. I will at least have a place to go. You cannot take my home." I looked at her. I felt absolutely no pity. I just felt tired. I turned to Marcus. He was already pulling a fresh stack of legal papers from his leather briefcase. "Marcus," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on my wife, "please explain the current housing situation to Eleanor." Marcus smiled warmly at Eleanor. It was the smile of a predator watching a steel trap spring shut for the very last time. "I would be completely delighted, Arthur," Marcus said, laying the heavy stack of papers flat on the steel table. "Eleanor, you really should have read the fine print on that assumption of liability document you signed at the notary today. Because the house in Greenwich does not belong to Arthur anymore. And it certainly does not belong to you." Marcus slid the top document across the steel table until it rested directly under Eleanor's handcuffed wrists. "Look closely at the title deed, Eleanor," Marcus said, tapping the heavy paper with his expensive pen. "You always assumed Arthur bought that house in his own name. You assumed it was standard marital property. But Arthur is a very forward-thinking man." Eleanor stared down at the paper. Her hands were shaking so violently that the metal chains rattled against the table. She could barely read the words, but the massive bold print at the top of the page was impossible to miss. The listed owner of the Greenwich estate was not Arthur. It was Apex Logistics Incorporated. 3 years ago, when my first business supposedly failed, I did not just sit back and lose everything. I said, my voice calm and steady. I restructured my entire life. I transferred the deed of the house into a corporate holding trust controlled by Apex Logistics. We were essentially living in a company-owned property. I paid the property taxes through a blind corporate account. Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes wide with total confusion. "But the equity loans. David Croft approved the loans in your name. The bank gave me the money. Because you presented forged personal documents to a corrupt loan officer who bypassed the legal title check." Marcus interjected, smiling coldly. "You borrowed personal money against a commercial asset you did not own. That is textbook bank fraud, which is why Mr. Croft is currently wearing an orange jumpsuit." Eleanor shook her head rapidly. No, that means the loans are invalid. The house is still there. Half of it is still mine." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold steel table. I wanted to make sure she heard every single word of her own destruction. "Did you forget what you did 2 hours ago at the strip mall, Eleanor?" I asked softly. Her breath hitched in her throat. The memory of the dingy notary office crashed down on her. You demanded that I sign Apex Logistics over to you, I continued. You wanted full executive control so you could stop the frozen wire transfer. You willingly signed an absolute assumption of liability document. You made yourself the sole owner of Apex Logistics. Which means, Agent Miller said, stepping up to the table and crossing her arms, you are the sole owner of a corporation that is deeply implicated in a federal racketeering and wire fraud investigation. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, we are seizing every single piece of property associated with Apex Logistics. That includes the corporate bank accounts. That includes the empty warehouse on the south side of town. And that includes the 5-bedroom house in Greenwich. Eleanor completely stopped breathing. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She had done it to herself. She had literally walked into a notary office and signed away her only remaining asset directly to the federal government. She had handed over the keys to her own house, just to try and save a fraction of the money she stole. You have absolutely nothing left, I said, standing up from my chair. The money you sent to Julian is frozen. The Cayman Islands trust fund you tried to hide is being seized by the International Fraud Division. Your boyfriend hates you and is currently trying to trade you for a lighter prison sentence. And the house you prized above everything else is going to be auctioned off by the federal government. Eleanor did not scream this time. She did not cry. The sheer magnitude of her failure had finally broken her mind. She just sat there, staring blankly at the metal table, her mouth slightly open. Agent Miller nodded to the 2 female guards standing by the door. Take her to federal processing, Agent Miller ordered. Strip her personal belongings, issue her a standard uniform, and put her in a holding cell pending her arraignment tomorrow morning. The guards walked forward, grabbed Eleanor by the arms, and pulled her to her feet. She did not fight them. She let them drag her toward the heavy metal door like a broken doll. Right before they pulled her out into the hallway, she turned her head and looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in her eyes. There was only a vast, empty darkness. The heavy metal door clicked shut, sealing her fate forever. Agent Miller turned to me and extended her hand. Arthur, I want to thank you for your complete cooperation. The evidence you and Marcus provided was bulletproof. We have been trying to build a solid case against Julian Vance and his illegal lending ring for 2 years. You handed him to us on a silver platter. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and professional. He stole from my family, Agent Miller. I just made sure he paid the price. Your personal accounts will be unfrozen by tomorrow morning, Agent Miller added, looking at her clipboard. The stolen equity funds will be routed back to your primary bank, minus the standard processing delays. You are completely in the clear. Thank you, I said. Marcus packed the remaining documents into his leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. He patted my shoulder. Let us get out of this depressing room, my friend, Marcus said cheerfully. I believe our work here is completely finished. We walked out of the interrogation room, down the long fluorescent lit hallway, and pushed through the heavy glass doors of the federal building. The rain had finally stopped. The thick gray clouds were breaking apart, allowing the late afternoon sun to shine through and reflect off the wet pavement. The air smelled clean and crisp. For the first time in 3 long years, I took a deep breath and felt the heavy, suffocating weight lift entirely off my chest. I was no longer the exhausted, beaten-down delivery driver. The fake uniform was burned. The act was over. I had my money back, my dignity intact, and the people who tried to destroy me were sitting in federal holding cells. We walked to the parking garage across the street. Marcus unlocked his sleek black Lexus. I can drop you back at the delivery depot to pick up your personal car, Arthur, Marcus said, opening the driver's side door. Or we can go find a very expensive steakhouse and celebrate the greatest legal trap I have ever had the pleasure of building. I stood by the passenger door and looked at the city skyline. The celebration could wait. There was a massive piece of my life that I had been forced to ignore for the last 3 years, just to keep this plan a secret. There was someone I needed to see. No steakhouse tonight, Marcus, I said, opening the car door and sliding into the leather seat. Oh, Marcus asked, starting the engine. Where to then? We are going to the airport, I replied, pulling my regular cell phone from my pocket and staring at a picture on my lock screen. I need to catch a flight to Boston. It is time I finally went to see my daughter. The taxi pulled to a stop in front of a brick apartment building in South Boston. I handed the driver a $20 bill and stepped out into the cold evening air. My daughter Sarah lived in apartment 4B. I had not seen her in 3 years. When my logistics company went under, Eleanor told Sarah that I had secretly emptied her college savings account to try and save the business. It was a complete lie. Eleanor took that money to pay off her own secret credit card debts, and she forged my signature on the withdrawal slips. I took the blame. I let my own daughter hate me, because if I fought Eleanor on it back then, she would have realized I was tracking the finances. I had to play the long game. The cost of my silence was my only child. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs. My legs felt heavy, but not from physical exhaustion. I stopped in front of a faded green door with a brass number 4 on it. I raised my fist and knocked twice. Silence. Then came the sound of soft footsteps. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened slowly. Sarah stood in the doorway. She was 26 now. She wore a faded gray sweater and held a damp dish towel in her hands. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. The color drained completely from her face. "Dad," she whispered. She did not sound happy. She sounded incredibly guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I came to give you something, Sarah," I said gently. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a thick white envelope, and held it out to her. She did not take it. She took a step back, her jaw tightening. "If this is some kind of apology for the college fund, I do not want it. Mom already told me you are working as a delivery driver. I do not need your pity money, and I do not want to fight with you. Your mother was arrested by the FBI this afternoon." "Sarah," I said flatly. Sarah froze. The dish towel slipped from her fingers and hit the hardwood floor. "What did you just say?" she breathed. "Eleanor is currently in federal custody for wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "She did not just steal your college fund. She stole our entire life savings to fund a massive real estate scam with another man. I spent the last 3 years building a trap with a forensic accountant to stop her. It is over. She has absolutely nothing left, and she is going to prison for a very long time." I reached out and pushed the white envelope directly into her hand. "Open it," I commanded softly. Sarah stared at me like I was a ghost. Her hands shook violently as she tore the top of the envelope off. She pulled out a certified bank document. It was a trust account established exclusively in her name. It held the exact amount of her stolen college fund, plus 3 years of compound interest. I had used the very first returns from Marcus's phantom investments to secure her money before I ever went after Julian's real estate debt. "I never touched your money, Sarah," I said, my voice finally cracking with emotion. "Your mother forged those withdrawal slips. I let you believe it was me because I needed her to think she had completely destroyed my confidence. I needed her to get sloppy. I am so sorry I let you believe I abandoned you." Sarah stared at the bank statement. The heavy wall of lies Eleanor had built around her for 3 years was crumbling into dust in a matter of seconds. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She looked up at me. The defensive anger was completely gone. She threw her arms around my neck and buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing loudly. I wrapped my arms tightly around her, holding my little girl for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. We stood in the doorway for a long time. Finally, she pulled back and wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "Come inside," she whispered, stepping back and opening the door wider. "You are freezing." I walked into the small, warm apartment. It smelled like cinnamon and baby powder. I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting in the middle of the living room rug, surrounded by colorful plastic blocks, was a little boy. He had curly brown hair and big brown eyes. He looked exactly like Sarah did when she was 2 years old. He held up a red toy truck and looked at me with pure, innocent curiosity. I could not breathe. I looked at Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah," I whispered, pointing at the boy. "Who is that?" Sarah walked over and picked the little boy up, resting him comfortably on her hip. She looked at me with a mixture of profound sadness and newfound hope. "Dad," she said softly, "I want you to meet your grandson, Leo." My blood ran completely cold. I had a grandson. I had a grandson for 2 entire years, and I had no idea. "Mom knew about him," Sarah continued, her voice trembling with fresh tears. "I called her the day he was born. She told me you did not care enough to come to the hospital. She said you called him a burden. A dark, heavy anger flared in my chest. Eleanor had known I had a grandson, and she had kept him a secret just to punish me. She had weaponized a child to maintain her narrative of my failure. But that anger faded almost instantly. Eleanor was sitting in a concrete cell right now, stripped of everything. She could never hurt my family again. "Hi, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I took a slow step closer. Leo looked at me, smiled, and offered me his red toy truck. But before I could take it, Sarah's cell phone sitting on the kitchen counter began to ring loudly. Sarah frowned. She carried Leo over to the counter and looked down at the glowing screen. Her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She looked back at me, the fear slowly creeping back into her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. "It is an automated operator. It is a collect call from a federal correctional facility in Connecticut." Eleanor was calling her. From jail. "Why would Mom be calling me right now?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over the answer button. "Does she know you are here?" The automated voice on the cell phone repeated the prompt. "You have a collect call from a federal inmate. Press 1 to accept." Sarah looked at me, her hand trembling in the air above the phone. She was terrified that Eleanor still had some kind of power over her. She was terrified of being manipulated all over again. I stepped forward and placed my hand gently over hers. "Answer it, Sarah," I said softly. "Put it on speaker. It is time to end this completely." Sarah took a deep breath. She pressed the button and stepped back, wrapping her arms around her own waist. "Sarah?" "Oh, thank God, Sarah. Are you there?" Eleanor's voice echoed from the small phone speaker. She sounded frantic, completely stripped of her usual composed elegance. She sounded like a woman drowning. "I am here, Mom," Sarah said, keeping her voice incredibly steady. "Listen to me, baby. You have to listen carefully," Eleanor cried rapidly. "Your father did something terrible. He set me up. He used his old business to frame me for a corporate crime. I am in a holding cell, and they will not let me call a lawyer. I need you to call Uncle Robert. Tell him to wire bail money immediately." I stood silently in the kitchen. Eleanor was still trying to spin the narrative. She genuinely believed that, because she had kept me separated from Sarah for 3 years, she still had a loyal pawn she could use. She thought Sarah hated me enough to help her without asking questions. "Mom," Sarah said, cutting through Eleanor's frantic rambling. "Why are you really in jail?" "I just told you. Arthur set me up." Eleanor insisted, her voice rising in panic. "He is a monster, Sarah. He is trying to take the house." "The FBI does not arrest people over a house, Mom," Sarah said, her voice growing colder and stronger with every word. "Did you steal Dad's retirement fund to give to another man?" The line went completely dead silent for 3 long seconds. "Sarah, where did you hear that?" Eleanor whispered, the panic now replaced by absolute dread. "And did you forge Dad's signature to empty my college fund?" Sarah pushed forward, her eyes locked onto mine. "Did you take my future to pay off your credit cards, and then lie to my face for 3 years?" "Baby, please," Eleanor sobbed, realizing her entire web of lies was collapsing. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. Julian promised me we would double the money. I did it for our family." "No, you did it for yourself," Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of closure, not pain. "Dad is standing right next to me, Mom. He gave me my money back. He gave me everything back." A sharp, ragged gasp came through the speaker. Eleanor finally understood where she was. She was not just in a federal holding cell. She was in a cage of her own making, and the very last person she thought she could manipulate had just locked the door from the outside. "Sarah, please do not leave me here," Eleanor begged. Her voice broke completely, descending into a pathetic wail. "I have no money. I have no one. Please." "Goodbye, Mom," Sarah said. "Do not call this number again." Sarah reached out and tapped the red button on the screen. The call disconnected. The silence that filled the apartment was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. Sarah let out a long, shaky exhale. She reached down and picked up Leo, holding him tightly against her chest. I walked over and kissed the top of my daughter's head. "It is over," I whispered. 6 months later, the cold Connecticut winter gave way to a bright, warm spring in Boston. A lot happened in those 6 months. Julian Vance tried to fight the federal charges, but without Richard Sterling to defend him, his case collapsed. He eventually took a plea deal for 15 years in a federal penitentiary. His commercial lenders seized whatever assets the government left behind. Eleanor refused to take a plea. She went to trial, arrogant to the very end, believing she could convince a jury she was just a manipulated housewife. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty on all counts. The judge, disgusted by the Cayman Islands Trust Fund and the complete lack of remorse, sentenced her to 20 years. The massive 5-bedroom house in Greenwich was liquidated at a federal auction. I did not keep any of the property associated with Apex Logistics. Marcus helped me dissolve the company entirely, washing my hands of the past. The returned equity funds, along with the liquidated assets, left me with more than enough to start completely over. I bought a beautiful, historic brownstone in a quiet neighborhood in South Boston. It was not a sterile mansion, it was a home. I gave the first-floor apartment to Sarah and Leo, and I took the second floor. I sat on a wooden park bench, holding a cup of hot coffee, watching the afternoon sun filter through the green leaves of the oak trees. A few yards away, Leo was running across the grass, laughing hysterically as a golden retriever chased a tennis ball past him. Sarah was sitting on a picnic blanket nearby, reading a book. I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing comfortable jeans and a soft wool sweater. The heavy steel-toed boots and the brown delivery uniform were gone forever. The exhaustion that had weighed down my bones for 3 years was completely erased. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. Eleanor spent 25 years calling me a failure. She thought wealth was measured by the size of a house, the brand of a car, and the circles of people you impressed at a country club. She traded her family for a chance to play a dangerous game of corporate greed. But sitting here in this park, listening to my grandson laugh, I knew exactly who the real winner was. I had lost a house, but I gained a home. I lost a cheating wife, but I got my daughter back. I stood up from the bench and walked across the grass to help Leo catch his red toy truck. My name is Arthur, and I am a very wealthy man. That brings us to the end of our story today. Arthur played a brilliant and patient game, enduring humiliation and pain to build a trap that Eleanor could not escape. It just goes to show that greed will always blind people to the reality right in front of them. Eleanor thought she was the smartest person in the room, but her obsession with money and status cost her the only things that truly mattered. What would you have done if you were in Arthur's shoes? Would you have the patience to build a trap for 6 months? Or would you have confronted her the moment you found out about the betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for listening. Please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on these stories of sweet justice. And before you go, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from today and what time it is there. I love reading where all of you are listening from. Stay safe, value your family, and I will see you in the next video.